Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a game from a 1938 tournament between two players whose style I really admire. Mikhail Botvinnik, who's playing the white side, against Raul Capablanca. Two very strategic players are doing battle in what I feel is one of the best games out there. So let's see whose plan, whose strategy in this game comes with greater effect. So the game kicks off with Botvinnik's d4, and we enter a Nimzo-Indian with bishop b4. After e3 and d5, well, this d5 move is not so well tied in with this bishop b4 move, because one of the things you look to do sometimes with the Nimzo is to give up the bishop for knight, and in exchange for it get or saddle white with doubled c-pawns. But that's not the case in this situation, because after a3, bishop takes, pawn takes, due to this tension, this unavoidable tension between the pawns, these c-pawns for white will be undoubled. So what has occurred as a result of that exchange are two things. One, black has given white the bishop pair, and two, black has helped white build the center. This knight pawn becomes now a bishop pawn and has better control now of the central point, d4. Black immediately latches out in the center with c5 and also opens up a diagonal for that queen. This tension between the c and d pawns is immediately resolved. C takes d, e takes d, and only then bishop d3. This is an important point because one might think you lose a tempo by playing here first, and then after d takes c, bishop takes c, white has lost tempo. That's true, but I think looking even deeper, you'll see that this is losing two tempi, two moves, because in the foreseeable future, there's queen c7, and there's already then the threat of c takes d with an attack on the bishop. So this bishop would likely have to move again to d3, a third time. So in short, first resolve the tension between those pawns, and then when the bishop plays to d3, it's there to stay. Black castles, knight e2, and we'll see a significant difference, a big difference, between e2 and f3. In short, by playing to e2, you allow yourself, as white, the possibility for a central expansion with f3 and e4, and we'll see that take shape soon enough. First off, b6 for black. Black is looking to get rid of one of the bishops, a typical idea when your opponent has the bishop pair, and it makes all the more sense since this light square bishop of these two is the better, since it works well with the resulting pawn structure. Pawns on dark, the light square bishop would be the better of the two. White castles, black follows through with the light square bishop exchange. The knight is slightly inconvenienced and also accessible. Eventually we'll see a queen coming out, but something was still at least accomplished. There's no longer that bishop pair. Bishop b2 seems a little bit awkward. Certainly running short on good diagonals. Wherever you look, there's just these dark pawns. And one might think, and this is something that crossed my mind, is to play something like a4 and then get the bishop on this diagonal. But there's something much more deep going on here. The bishop deploys itself to b2 to reinforce d4. As indirect as it may be, it's reinforcing d4, and white has every intention of still following through with this f3, e4 idea. So queen to d7 has a close eye on that a4 square. And now we see a4. What white would like to do is something like queen to d3, but I think that this move is played just so that this queen cannot maybe make use of that a4 square. So it just rules that out altogether. Additionally, you might see this pawn being used as some spearhead on the queen side, depending on what happens in the center. If we're seeing c5, you're not going to be seeing a5. If you're seeing, however, this type of capture, well, white can be recapturing, the structure is perfect, and then this idea could take shape. White could maybe still go forward with a central expansion, but something like a minority, I guess the lowest form of a minority attack with a5 can really show itself. So anyhow, a4 in response to queen d7. Rook to e8, very logical, half open file. Queen d3, pressure on this knight, and now we have a shift in the pawn structure. c4 kind of just slams the door in the queen's face, but something is accomplished. The queen has to move a second time. She does stay on this diagonal, stays off the back rank, of course, stays on this diagonal because it's the e4 square that she wants to support. Again, this is White's idea, f3 with e4 to follow. So because of this advance, White need not worry as much now about this d4 pawn. You have this c pawn, which initially was that knight pawn. That knight pawn is essentially the one that's now defending that d4 point. And so we're going to be having knight g3, f3, e4. All these next moves for White are geared at getting this advance in and eventually looking to attack that black king. So a lot of repositioning on the white side. In fact, these next handful of moves, the knight is looking to play to b3, and then the queen is going to be in a spot to pick off this pawn. So this is what we have. Rook on a to e1, following through with these plans, knight c6, knight g3, knight a5, and here we go, f3, e4. The knight hops into b3. It's a nice post. It is obstructing the a4 point, but actually let me retract that. This knight is maybe not such a great piece. It could actually turn out to be a very misplaced piece. It is getting in the way of the queen's communication with a4, but if the attention turns on the king side, which it will very soon, this knight could certainly be offsides. e4, queen takes a, e5, the knight is hit, knight d7, and now what do you do? White is looking to play on the king side. One thing that you could be looking to determine that is your pawn structure, starting first at the tail of a pawn structure and running up towards the head, drawing a line. You're pointing in the direction where you should be playing, in this case, the king side. Now, one thing to be aware of is that you might be tempted to just play f4, but I feel that that would be allowing black to do something that's a bit annoying. If f4, this was not the move played. The move that was played was queen to f2, but pop quiz, what would you do, or what move is maybe available to black after the move f4? If you'd like to, pause the video, see if you can figure out a difference between f4 and queen to f2 in this instance. Okay, one of the moves that's available is knight on b to c5, exploiting the fact that this queen is unprotected. If queen takes queen, knight takes, the queens are off the board, the attack is maybe not going, it's probably not going to be there for white without the queens on the board. And not to mention this bishop is probably still struggling to do something constructive. So the queens would have to be, or the queen exchange would have to be avoided with, let's say, queen to e2. And now this is a much different square. If you compare b3 and d3, the more central d3, this knight is a giant pest. Okay, the rook could move and hit the queen. She runs away. There might still be something in this direction for white, but to give black the possibility of transferring the knight from b3 to d3 is something that should be avoided. And it is avoided because in this position here, we don't have an immediate pawn storm with f4, f5, but rather getting out of that tactic, knight b to c5, I believe, and now this guy is still stranded, still needs a bunch of moves to get working. So everything is just charged up here. White is looking to do what exactly? Open files. So first off, g6. It rules out knight f5 and queen g3 stuff. That could have been the threat. And now f4, following through. f5. This right here is a very common move to be seeing. If your opponent, if you're on the black side and your opponent is ready to be in a position to cement not only one pawn on the fifth rank, but a second one, something almost always needs to be done about that, and you'll often see the move f5 employed. And that is the move played right now, f5. So what do? You have to capture it. You have to release this potential energy, the rooks and the queens. You have to open files that are there for a reason. They want to play. They want to see the black side of the board. So you capture. You definitely capture. doing something such as assessing this position and saying, you know what, I don't want to capture because I like having a connected pass pawn. Well, that's true. Connected pass pawns are a strong thing, but look what you do if you don't capture. I'm going to make a passing move such as h3. Let's just say flight square. If you're doing something like this, if you're not capturing, in other words, all 4 of these pieces, actually forget it, all 5 pieces are big dummies. What are they going to do? In fact, after something like knight f8 to e6, white has absolutely nothing. And this pawn, I believe, will have time to just march all the way down or some type of break. You've bought black a ton of time if you're not going to be capturing. That should not even be a thought if you have all these pieces lined up here. Open the position up. Anyhow, e takes f en passant. Knight takes f5. The e file is ripped open. Botvinnik is looking to rip open the f file as well. A pair of rooks come off. Rook to e8. You do not capture the rook. Capturing the rook allows the queen to come back to defend. It's not needed. Instead, it's rook to e6, pressure on the knight laterally. That's the thing you look to do after rook is on an open file. Where can I position it so that it's functioning laterally in a good way? And often, if you could do that in your opponent's position, all the better. Rook e6, the rooks come off, and now the knight is hit as a result. King g7 to defend. Queen f4, she's looking to sneak in by way of, let's say, that c7 square. Queen drops back to defend, and now queen to e5, placing this knight in a pin, and queen to e7 to defend. Can you spot this next move for white? It's really one of the more spectacular ones out there. If you'd like to, pause the video, see if you can find the best move for white. Okay, the move is bishop to a3. Very spectacular move, deflecting the queen away so that an additional tactic can present itself. What tactic is that exactly? This is another pop quiz. What would you do in this position as white? Pause the video if you'd like to solve it. Okay, the best move for white is knight to h5, and it's certainly the follow-up move that white had foreseen. This was all calculated. In fact, I believe the remainder of the game at this point right here was calculated. From bishop a3 through the rest of the moves of the game, I believe it was all calculated out. So this is what we have as it's essentially finishing up now. Bishop a3, queen takes, knight h5, sacrificing another piece. Pawn takes knight, queen to g5, king f8, queen takes knight with check. If you go here, it's a mate in 1, 2. And so instead the king, of course, goes to g8, and now passed pawns, they need to be pushed. e7 is there, and the only thing that black has left to try is some perpetual check. This knight, very sad piece. It's just the queen, if anything at all, that could maybe save the day. What is tried is queen c1. A few checks are thrown in. The king is racing up the side of the board, grabbing first a pawn, coming back to h4, eventually getting the g pawn in there to block, and dodging just one more check after king to h5. Black resigns. There's absolutely nothing to do about the possibility for queen to f8 mate, or the queening of the pawn. If, let's say, h6, queen g6, and then queening, is going to be game over. So as it stood in this game, after some dodging of checks there, the king walking a little bit of a tightrope up the h file, after king h5, black resigns. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.